Hey guys, tonight we slip into a story that's older than the roads you probably walk every day, yet heavy enough that you probably won't survive this. Well, emotionally, don't worry, your snacks are safe. You trudge with me through the soft rustle of autumn leaves and the crisp chill of early mornings, imagining dirt-streaked faces, wagons creaking under the weight of dreams and despair, and the faint echo of songs that were never meant to be lost. This is the Trail of Tears, a chapter in American history that is as haunting as it is instructive, a journey that stretches not just across miles, but across generations. You feel the rhythm of the past brushing against your skin like the breeze, carrying whispers of ancestors who walked before you, sometimes stumbling, sometimes marching, always holding on to fragments of home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's kind of a fun way to know who's traveling with me tonight. You start imagining the Cherokee in their rolling hills and wooded valleys, the Choctaw tending to cornfields, and the Seminole living amongst cypress swamps, all unaware that a legal edict would soon tear the fabric of their daily lives. You sense the tension, the almost imperceptible tremor of anxiety and dread that threaded through these communities as rumors and reports of forced removal reached even the quietest cabins. You can almost hear the whispers in the night, elders reminding young ones of the old ways, of dances that would soon feel like memory, and songs that, if sung too loudly, might draw the attention of encroaching authorities. And as you wander mentally through these villages, you notice the little details, the way sunlight falls across a creek, the scent of cooking fires mingling with the earthiness of livestock, the laughter of children who have no idea that their playground will soon become a trail marked by sorrow. Historians still argue whether the early signs of removal were fully comprehensible to the tribes or if disbelief softened the blow momentarily. You imagine families packing only what they can carry, faces set with a quiet determination, hearts heavy yet stubbornly hopeful. You see the wagons, each one a microcosm of a community, stuffed with blankets, food, keepsakes, and perhaps a small wooden idol or a talisman passed down from ancestors. You feel a tug in your chest, a mixture of empathy and fascination, the sort of emotional cocktail that keeps you awake at night thinking, how did anyone survive this? And yet, in that same moment, you're strangely soothed by the rhythm of imagining their footsteps in your mind, a gentle, haunting cadence that almost lulls you towards sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, tracing the first footprints that will soon stretch into thousands, into a story that refuses to be forgotten. You wander through the lands of the native nations before the upheaval, and it's easy to forget how vibrant and structured their societies were. The Cherokee, for instance, had towns that rivaled some European settlements in terms of planning, with log cabins arranged along streets, council houses standing proudly in the center, and schools where children learned not only survival skills but reading, writing, and law. You almost hear the laughter and chatter, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the scent of freshly baked cornbread mingling with the earthy aroma of nearby fields. The Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole all had their unique adaptations to the environment, their social structures interwoven with kinship, spirituality, and an intricate knowledge of the land that allowed them to thrive for centuries. You can sense the harmony in their routines, the ebb and flow of planting seasons, hunting trips, river fishing, and ceremonial gatherings that knit the community tightly together. It's like watching a carefully choreographed dance, one where everyone knows their steps and the music is ancient yet ever-changing. You notice little quirks too, the sorts of details that historians sometimes overlook. Like how some Cherokee families used crushed animal dung as a rudimentary sunscreen, or how the Choctaw had a playful tradition of racing pigs through their villages during festivals, cheering and laughing until their voices echoed across the fields. You probably wouldn't survive this if you tried their methods, but it's endearing to imagine, isn't it? Their daily lives were complex and layered, not merely pre-modern, as some accounts would simplistically suggest. Scholars still argue whether these communities could have adapted fully to European-style governance if left undisturbed, but you can see the ingenuity, the resilience, and the quiet pride in every activity, From trading goods at market to crafting intricate beadwork and pottery that told stories of history, myth, and memory. You feel a subtle tension beneath the idyllic scenes, the sense that the outside world is inching closer, that the pressure of settlers, state governments, and the federal government's ambitions are slowly encroaching. Roads are being built, towns expanding, and treaties signed under duress that chip away at sovereignty. You imagine families gathering around their evening fires, elders whispering warnings, children half listening while imagining what the future might hold, unaware of how dramatically it will shift. And as you drift along these pre-removal villages in your mind, you can almost hear the distant ripple of political murmurs, newspapers printing stories about Indian land and opportunities for settlers, creating a pressure that will eventually shatter these peaceful lives. There's a fragile beauty here, a vividness that makes you ache slightly, knowing how much is about to be lost and how generations of culture, knowledge, and belonging will be forced to march across unfamiliar lands. You step closer to the edges of those peaceful settlements, and the air starts to thicken with tension, almost like walking into a room where everyone is pretending nothing is wrong, but the floor creaks under the weight of secrets. Encroaching settlers press against the borders of native lands, claiming rivers, fertile soil, and forests as their own, often without any sense of courtesy or negotiation. You trudge along dusty roads where wagons rumble with new arrivals, kicking up clouds of dust that hang in the air like invisible warnings. State governments, particularly Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, are hungry for expansion, and their laws increasingly clash with treaties that the native nations painstakingly negotiated over decades. You hear the faint clatter of hammers as new cabins rise along the edge of indigenous lands, and in your mind, you can almost smell the mix of fresh-cut timber and tension. Families sit outside, trying to maintain routines, but the whispers are growing louder. Talk of land seizures, court battles, and settlers pressing claims with little regard for legality. The legal maneuvers are particularly insidious. You might not survive reading about all the courtroom drama, but historians still argue whether the Cherokee, for example, could have leveraged the U.S. legal system to fully protect their territory if the political will hadn't been against them. The famous Worcester versus Georgia case comes to mind, where the Supreme Court sided with the Cherokee, but President Andrew Jackson reportedly ignored the ruling, letting state authorities enforce their laws anyway. You can imagine the frustration and disbelief in the Cherokee council houses, elders shaking their heads, scribes meticulously recording arguments, while children play outside oblivious to the storm approaching. Meanwhile, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek communities face similar pressures, negotiating, pleading, and sometimes reluctantly ceding land just to delay confrontation. You sense the slow but relentless tightening of a noose, one woven with maps, surveys, and the unyielding determination of settlers who see nothing but opportunity. Quirky, almost surreal incidents crop up amidst this tension too. Like when a group of settlers misidentified a bear in the woods as a giant, threatening native, and a minor skirmish ensued, something that sounds absurd today, but it reflects the climate of fear, suspicion, and misunderstanding that pervaded the frontier. You probably wouldn't survive navigating these disputes in real life, not with tempers high and rules constantly bending. And yet, through all the chaos, you notice the resilience, the way native nations tried to adapt, sending delegations, holding councils, and seeking allies among sympathetic officials. It's a delicate dance of survival and resistance, a slow-motion prelude to the march that will forever be remembered as the Trail of Tears. You feel a shiver as the first hints of inevitability creep in, the distant echo of wagons and government edicts merging into a drumbeat that will soon summon entire nations to move against their will. You feel the weight of politics pressing down as the Indian Removal Act slams onto the scene, and it's almost dizzying how one piece of legislation can redraw lives overnight. Andrew Jackson, with his characteristic stubbornness, champions the law, framing it as benevolent, voluntary relocation, he claims, meant to protect native nations from the encroaching settlers' greed. You trudge alongside the shadow of government buildings, imagining the hurried pens scratching signatures across parchment, the echo of hammers in courtrooms as legal frameworks shift beneath the feet of people who've walked the same lands for generations. Newspapers buzz with propaganda, portraying removal as progress, opportunity, and civilization, while native leaders pore over the language, weighing words like precious gems. The act passes in 1830, and suddenly, what was theoretical becomes unavoidable. You can almost taste the metallic tension in the air, like iron mixing with autumn dust, a prelude to the upheaval about to unfold. Families receive the news in hushed tones. Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole leaders wrestle with impossible choices: negotiate, resist, or attempt to flee. Some see compliance as a temporary safeguard. Others understand the slow erosion of their lands and cultures. You notice subtle acts of defiance, like secret councils or coded messages in letters, tiny sparks of resilience in a landscape darkened by fear. Scholars still argue whether all tribes fully understood the magnitude of the removal at first, or if hope created a kind of protective blindness. You trudge along beside elders who sigh deeply, children tugging at skirts, and young adults trying to balance anger, fear, and a strange, stubborn hope. Each family packs not just belongings, but memories, recipes, talismans, and the stories of ancestors, holding them tight as if sheer will could anchor them to the lands they're about to leave behind. There's something almost absurd in the small, human details amid such devastation. You probably wouldn't survive the irony if it weren't framed in history, like the Choctaw trying to preserve their prized racehorses while simultaneously being herded onto wagons, or a Cherokee musician composing a farewell tune that no one will hear until decades later. And yet, through all the bureaucratic chaos and creeping dread, there's that heartbeat of determination, the quiet assertion that even if the land changes, memory and identity remain stubbornly unmovable. You feel the drumbeat building, each passing day a step closer to the march, the inevitability of thousands of footsteps converging into one long, sorrowful rhythm, the opening strains of the Trail of Tears. You trudge alongside families as they prepare for a journey none of them volunteered for, and the air is thick with anticipation, anxiety, and the faint smell of smoke from cooking fires that may never see another dawn in those familiar valleys. Packing is a delicate dance between necessity and sentimentality. Blankets, tools, a few jars of preserved food, and sometimes a cherished musical instrument or hand-carved toy, each item carefully selected, each choice a compromise between survival and memory. You notice elders inspecting wagons, adjusting harnesses, whispering instructions to children who fidget and watch the sky, unaware of how long the days ahead will stretch. Animals, horses, mules, and dogs, are corralled, some nervous, others surprisingly obedient, sensing the disruption in the rhythm of life. The air hums with quiet murmurs of farewell. We will return, someday, or keep our stories alive, words that float like smoke above packed wagons and over worried faces. Quirky little rituals emerge in these tense days, the sort of things that might make you smirk if not for the sadness lurking underneath. Some Cherokee families mark the edges of their property with stones or sticks, an almost ceremonial gesture to claim the land in spirit, even as the law strips it away in reality. The Choctaw hold private dances under moonlight, not for celebration but to reaffirm bonds, weaving movement and song into a last act of presence. Historians still argue whether these small acts of tradition offered real psychological resilience or were simply moments of feudal comfort in an unavoidable disaster. You, walking alongside them in imagination, can feel the strange interplay of hope and fear, the tenderness in whispered words, and the subtle tension that comes with knowing that every step forward is one step away from home. Children's curiosity pierces through the gloom. You notice them inspecting wagons, pretending to drive the animals, and asking questions with innocent bluntness. Why must we go? And will the rivers follow us there? Elders respond with patience, sometimes with soft half-truths, sometimes with stories of ancestors who traveled before them, as if courage could be passed like a talisman. And you see young adults, strong and weary, testing ropes, organizing supplies, whispering reassurances that they themselves do not feel entirely. Every bag, bundle, and cart tells a story of survival, memory, and the stubborn refusal to let everything familiar vanish without leaving a trace. As the last preparations are made, there's a strange, almost ceremonial finality in the air. Families gather for a last meal together, the smell of stews and cornbread filling the space, mingling with the earthy scent of disturbed soil. You feel the weight of anticipation pressing on your shoulders, the quiet anxiety, the unspoken question of whether they are ready, or whether anyone can ever be ready, for what lies ahead. And as the sun sets, painting the sky in muted oranges and purples, you sense the moment when the first wagons will roll and the long march begins, winding paths already etched in memory before a single foot hits the dust. You trudge onto the trail itself, the path stretching endlessly under a sky that seems too vast to contain so much grief. The first steps are cautious, almost ceremonial, as if the earth beneath knows the sorrow and resistance threading through each stride. Wagons creak, mules snort, and children cling to parents' hands while elders walk with a stoic cadence, their faces lined with the tension of anticipation and quiet despair. Dust rises with each step, settling into eyes, lungs, and hair, a constant reminder that the road is not just physical but emotional, an unrelenting test of endurance and spirit. You feel the rhythm of marching feet merging with your own heartbeat, an almost hypnotic pattern that lulls you into the cadence of collective sorrow, each step echoing centuries of displacement, loss, and resilience. The weather becomes an immediate adversary. Sun scorches the open fields, rain turns the path into treacherous mud, and cold nights bite through thin blankets. You notice families improvising, tarps draped over wagons, hastily dug fire pits, and small prayers whispered before each meal. Illness creeps silently, a specter in the night, fever, dysentery, and cholera quietly claiming those too weak to continue. Historians still argue whether the pace of these marches was deliberately lethal or a tragic outcome of logistical incompetence, but you feel it keenly in your imagined stride, the exhaustion pressing down like an invisible hand on your back. People stumble, rise, and trudge forward again, driven by hope, duty, and the faint, stubborn desire to survive. There's a surreal layer to the journey as well. You probably wouldn't survive some of the oddities if you were there physically, like a Cherokee musician composing a solemn melody that travels across the wagons, or a child playing with a makeshift toy horse while parents argue over rations. Even the terrain itself seems mischievous, rivers that rise unexpectedly, muddy hills that swallow wagon wheels, and sudden, inexplicable gusts of wind that scatter personal belongings. You sense the trail taking on a life of its own, almost as if the land remembers every footstep, every tear, and carries it along. Despite the hardships, small acts of compassion surface. Neighbors sharing food, a blanket passed down to a shivering child, or a whispered story meant to soothe fear. By the end of the day, the long shadows stretch across weary faces and stretched out paths. You notice how exhaustion has made communities tighter, shared suffering forges connections that weren't there before, and subtle leadership emerges from those willing to keep everyone moving. The first night camps are hurriedly set up, fires crackling, smoke curling into the sky, and you can almost hear the silent promise of survival echoing through the dark. And as you imagine lying down beside them, the rhythm of distant footsteps fading into the night, you realize that the Trail of Tears is not just about the miles traveled. It's about the endurance of spirit, the tenuous grasp on hope, and the unspoken bravery threaded through every weary body along the road. You trudge further into the heart of the march, and the human cost begins to weigh palpably. Cold nights bite harder than expected, blankets offer little protection, and the thin rations barely sustain the strength needed for another day of trudging. Children cry quietly from exhaustion or hunger, elders shuffle with aching joints, and young adults carry the heaviest loads, both physical and emotional. Disease spreads stealthily, cholera, dysentery, smallpox, and you can almost feel the invisible touch of illness in your imagined walk alongside them. It's relentless, this march, a rhythm of suffering punctuated by occasional, fragile laughter that refuses to be snuffed out. Every mile takes a toll, every step echoes a loss that piles invisibly atop the already heavy burden of leaving home. Historical records note that thousands perished along the trail, though exact numbers remain debated. You probably wouldn't survive even a fraction of this in real life, not with the heat, the exhaustion, and the scarcity of clean water. And yet, even in despair, moments of resilience shine through. Families share what little they have, loaves of cornbread split into portions, warm water poured into cupped hands, whispered prayers that float into the sky like smoke signals. Scholars still argue whether the organizational failures were intentional or merely the result of neglectful bureaucracy, but either way, the toll was undeniable and you feel it, step after step, in your imagined journey. Quirky, almost surreal incidents break through the monotony of suffering. Like a child discovering a turtle along the path and holding it as a talisman for protection, or a small dog relentlessly following a wagon for days despite exhaustion. These small details, odd yet tender, offer glimpses of humanity's persistence even amidst catastrophe. You can almost hear the echoing drumbeat of footsteps, the shuffling rhythm that becomes a mantra, a hypnotic reminder that the march continues no matter what, and that survival is measured not only in physical endurance but in mental tenacity. By the time the marchers pause for brief rest, the landscape has become an extension of the ordeal itself. Mud, rocks, swollen rivers, and relentless sun or rain shape the pace and morale of the group. Yet the community finds ways to persevere, improvising makeshift shelters, rotating duties, and supporting the weak. You feel the duality here, the crushing weight of tragedy intertwined with the stubborn, almost stubbornly human insistence on endurance. Each day is both loss and resistance, suffering and memory, and as you imagine lying down beside the weary travelers, the rhythmic, collective heartbeat of thousands echoes in your mind, haunting yet strangely comforting in its persistent continuity. You continue along the trail, and now it's easy to notice the oddities, the small, almost surreal details that sprinkle themselves throughout such a monumental tragedy. Some are tender, some bizarre, and all are human. A Cherokee elder might pause mid-step to sketch a map of their old home in the dirt, retracing familiar streams and hills with a stick, while children, trying to amuse themselves, fashion tiny boats from bark and sail them down muddy puddles. You probably wouldn't survive the mental strain of watching generations push to the brink while also noticing these little, fleeting moments, but they exist, like glimmers of resilience in the harsh monotony. Even the weather seems capricious, teasing with sun and pouring rain, rivers that swell unexpectedly, or muddy fields that swallow wagon wheels just for sport. You notice small acts of human endurance and compassion. Strangers share water, blankets are passed down to shivering children, and families sing quietly to soothe fear. Historians still argue whether these acts were purely instinctive or imbued with a deeper cultural tradition of community care, but in your mind, each gesture is a tiny flame against the encroaching darkness. Oddities also abound, horses refusing to move unless coaxed with a particular song, a baby soothed by the sound of a wagon wheel's creak, or a Cherokee musician composing a solemn melody that drifts across the marchers like a ghostly lullaby. You feel these moments as oddly comforting in the midst of relentless hardship, like little sighs of humanity refusing to be erased. The trail is punctuated by stops at clearing, rivers, and makeshift encampments. At each pause, there's a delicate balance of tending to the sick, arranging food, and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Children play under watchful eyes, while elders exchange stories or silently check on distant relatives. Quirky incidents add a strange levity, like a dog insisting on accompanying a wagon for miles or a wagon wheel breaking in the least convenient moment, prompting communal problem-solving. All these moments weave together into a tapestry of resilience, humor, and sorrow, and you can't help but feel the strange, almost hypnotic rhythm of survival stitching the group together. By the time night falls, you notice the trail settling into a strange quiet. The wind carries whispered songs, a child's soft cough, and the creak of wagons slowly cooling with the dark. You sense the mental and emotional stamina required to continue, the invisible weight of collective endurance pressing against every body. And as you drift through these imagined scenes, it becomes clear, the Trail of Tears is not only a march of loss, but a testament to humanity's capacity for tenderness, oddity, and resilience even when the world itself seems determined to strip everything away. You finally approach the edges of Indian Territory, and there's a strange mixture of relief, confusion, and quiet dread hanging over the land. The landscape is foreign, rolling plains and wooded valleys that are nothing like the familiar hills, rivers, and forests left behind. Families step cautiously, eyes scanning for landmarks, water sources, and safe patches of ground for setting up new homes. You notice the tentative hope in the way they unload wagons, the careful inspection of soil for planting, and the subtle way elders teach children to recognize unfamiliar flora and fauna. There's pride, too, in their ability to endure, to reach the other side, though it is tempered by grief for the friends, relatives, and neighbors who did not make it. Every step is heavy with the memory of loss, and you feel it pressing down alongside them, an invisible but palpable weight. You witness the immediate challenges: scarcity of food, rough terrain, and makeshift shelters that do little to protect against wind, rain, or the occasional insect swarm. The Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole all attempt to re-establish routines, yet every effort is met with obstacles. Children still play, but the games are quieter, more subdued, echoing memories of homes they will never see again. Elders consult over maps and tribal records, trying to divide land and resources in a way that ensures survival, yet nothing feels permanent, nothing feels truly secure. Historians still argue whether the relocation's long-term consequences were fully anticipated, but it's clear in your mind that each family confronts an unfamiliar reality that is both physically demanding and emotionally taxing. There are small, almost surreal moments in this dislocation too. A young Cherokee girl plants flowers by a stream, insisting that this will make the place ours, while a Choctaw elder sketches the outline of a familiar hill on a piece of bark, passing the memory down like a secret. You probably wouldn't survive emotionally if you carried all the collective grief, yet these tiny acts of remembrance and adaptation provide glimmers of hope. You notice neighbors helping one another, sharing water, trading tools, and performing ceremonies that tether them to the traditions they cannot leave behind. Even in unfamiliar territory, identity persists, carried in stories, rituals, and the silent understanding that the journey has reshaped them but not erased them. As the sun sets over these new lands, you feel the exhaustion of the march mix with a tentative sense of arrival. Families settle around campfires, murmuring quietly, mapping the outlines of their new lives in hushed tones. It's an awkward, fragile balance of relief and anticipation, of grief and stubborn persistence. And as you imagine lying down beside them for the night, the stars overhead are strangely comforting, reminding you that while homes have shifted, spirit, memory, and resilience remain, quietly enduring the shock of forced relocation and promising a faint but unwavering thread of continuity in this profoundly altered world. You linger in the settlements, and now the intellectual weight of history presses down as the story of the Trail of Tears settles into memory, debate, and culture. You can almost hear the whispers of scholars arguing in libraries, their pens scratching furiously, trying to label this chapter as genocide, forced migration, or a tragic inevitability of expansion. Historians still debate the precise terminology, weighing intent, scale, and legal context, while you trudge alongside families who experienced it firsthand, for whom labels mean little compared to the daily reality of rebuilding homes, planting crops, and mourning the absent. You notice the subtle, enduring impact: language, songs, ceremonies, and family histories transmitted orally, carrying memory across generations in ways that no law or map could erase. The Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole all face challenges in recreating a semblance of community in unfamiliar territory. You can almost see elders teaching younger generations traditional crafts and dances, musicians playing familiar tunes beside unfamiliar streams, and children tracing patterns in the dirt reminiscent of their old homes. Small rituals serve as psychological anchors, comforting hearts that have endured unimaginable strain. Oddities emerge even here, a child forgetting for a moment that they are in a new land, mimicking a game they played miles away, or a neighbor improvising a stove from rocks and mud. These details, strange yet endearing, highlight the resilience of culture even amid trauma. You probably wouldn't survive the mental balancing act of grief and adaptation, but imagining it helps you grasp the perseverance threaded through daily life. The scholarly debates ripple beyond labels. Some argue that removal was inevitable due to settler expansion. Others assert that political maneuvering and sheer disregard for native sovereignty caused unnecessary suffering. And yet, The lived reality, what you can sense in your trudge along these imagined pathways, is full of subtle negotiations, clever adaptations, and acts of defiance. Songs are sung, laws are quietly remembered, and community bonds, though stretched, are reinforced by shared experience. Every step, every act of rebuilding, is a quiet assertion that identity persists. You feel the paradox of triumph and tragedy intertwined. The trail of tears may have uprooted bodies, but it cannot uproot spirit, memory, or the stubborn insistence of culture to survive, adapt, and endure in the face of deliberate displacement. By evening, you notice the settlements taking shape with small houses, fenced fields, and communal areas. Smoke curls from chimneys, echoing the resilience of cooking fires from the original homelands, and the collective heartbeat of each community hums quietly in the twilight. And as you imagine resting beside them, you realize that memory, debate, and cultural continuity are all part of the same trail, leading quietly forward into generations yet to come, whispering a story that refuses to fade. You find yourself moving more slowly now, letting the rhythm of the march soften as the narrative begins to wind down. The families in Indian Territory have begun to settle into routines, fragile though they may be, with fields being planted, homes repaired, and stories told around crackling fires that smell faintly of sage and wood smoke. Children's laughter is quieter but present, and elders sit in contemplation, recounting memories of the lands left behind while teaching the young how to honor traditions in unfamiliar surroundings. You feel a subtle calm creeping over the journey, a lull in the relentless tension of the past sections, as if the land itself is breathing with those who survived, allowing space for reflection and recovery. It's comforting and yet bittersweet, knowing that the journey has forever altered lives, landscapes, and futures. You notice the little rituals that tether them to home, a song repeated at dusk, a dance performed by children to honor the ancestors, a handmade charm placed at a threshold. Quirky moments persist too, like an elderly man quietly sketching a distant hill on a piece of bark, ensuring its memory endures, or a dog that has claimed a particular spot beside a fire as its own. Historians still argue about the psychological effects of relocation, the intergenerational trauma, and how much resilience comes from culture versus necessity. You probably wouldn't survive witnessing it firsthand, but imagining the mix of sorrow and stubborn persistence gives a deeper sense of human endurance. Each act of remembrance, each whispered story, serves as a lifeline to a past that was nearly lost and a future that will carry its traces. You trudge along the final stretches of the narrative with a soft exhale, letting your mind drift over gently rolling plains, streams that reflect the fading sunlight, and the quiet hum of life persisting despite everything. Families adjust to seasons, learn new landscapes, and slowly stitch together a sense of place, though the shadow of loss remains. You can feel the quiet strength in community gatherings, shared meals, and the gentle mentorship of elders guiding children, ensuring that memory is not only preserved but transformed into a living, breathing culture. And as night falls, you notice how the winds whisper through the trees, carrying stories, songs, and the faint echo of footsteps across the plains. The trail of tears, though marked by sorrow, ends here not with despair but with a slow, reflective hum of continuity, memory, and survival. You feel the quiet pull of imagination drawing you close, the soft murmur of history brushing against your mind, and the gentle reassurance that even in the darkest moments, humanity persists. You trudge slowly through these final mental steps, noticing the interplay of grief and endurance, the strange beauty in acts of remembrance, and the soft, persistent rhythm that binds generations together across time and space. You slow your steps now, letting the rhythm of the trail of tears fade gently into the background of your mind. The sun has set, and the landscape is bathed in the soft, muted glow of twilight, stretching shadows across fields and rivers that once witnessed sorrow and resilience alike. You can almost hear the faint rustle of leaves, the whisper of a creek, the distant murmur of a child's laughter carried on the wind, all mingling with the lingering memory of footsteps that have long since passed. There's a softness in the air, a hushed reverence, as if the land itself exhales, allowing the heart to unclench after the tension of relentless journeys. Families, long displaced, have found fragile homes, and their memories ripple quietly through the spaces they occupy. You sense the stories being retold around fires, in low voices, stretching into night, teaching the young and comforting the old. You notice the smallest of gestures, the careful tending of a garden, the meticulous arrangement of keepsakes, the steady repetition of a song that carries the past into the present. Even the winds seem gentle now, rustling through trees with a soft, lullaby-like rhythm that carries a sense of continuity and enduring hope. You breathe in this calm, letting it settle like a warm blanket around your shoulders, the collective spirit of resilience threading through every imagined step. The world beyond the trail still moves, but here, in this quiet moment of reflection, you feel the merging of sorrow, endurance, and memory into something almost soothing. The hardships, the losses, the moments of despair, they remain, but they now coexist with acts of courage, community, and persistence. You let your mind drift, imagining the stars overhead, the soft glow of firelight, and the whispered songs of ancestors, all blending into a slow, gentle hum. And as your own thoughts start to quiet, the echo of history becomes a tender, whispering companion, guiding you softly toward rest, reassurance, and the quiet certainty that memory endures and spirit persists.